They thought a petty HOA fine would make me bow down to their power-hungry demands, not knowing they just picked a fight with the chief of police. But what happens when I uncover their illegal operation targeting our community's hardworking first responders, and decide it's time for the hunter to become the hunted? Welcome to my channel. Comment below where you're watching from. I'll never forget that morning. It started just like any other day, but ended up changing our whole neighborhood forever. As I walked out to my car ready for another day at the police station, I spotted something bright green stuck under my windshield wiper. At first I thought it was just another takeout menu, but my heart sank when I realized it was an HOA violation notice, $79 for improper lawn maintenance. You've got to be kidding me. I stood there in my uniform, coffee in hand, staring at my lawn. It looked exactly like it had for the past 15 years I'd lived here. The grass was green, healthy, and recently mowed. Sure, maybe it wasn't perfect like a golf course, but it was neat and well maintained. That's when I heard the distinct sound of high heels clicking on the sidewalk. Good morning. The voice was sugary sweet, but had an edge to it that made my teeth hurt. Karen Mitchell, our newest HOA board member, was doing her morning inspection walk with a tablet in hand. She'd moved in 6 months ago, and immediately started campaigning for a board position. Now 3 weeks into her role, she was making everyone's life miserable. Miss Mitchell, I nodded politely, holding up the notice. Mind explaining this? My lawn meets all reasonable standards. She barely looked up from her tablet. Section 7 paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines clearly states that grass height must not exceed 3 and yours is approximately 3½ inches. She said this while tapping away at her screen, probably documenting another violation somewhere. I took a deep breath, remembering my training and dealing with difficult people. I've been a bit busy this week with a major case at work. I'll mow it this weekend. Rules are rules, she chirped, finally looking up. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. Oh, and you might want to do something about those garden gnomes. They're not on the approved decoration list. My garden gnomes, the ones my late wife had collected. I felt my blood pressure rising, but kept my voice steady. I wasn't aware we needed approval for garden decorations that have been here for over a decade. New board, new rules. She waved her tablet cheerfully. We're bringing this neighborhood into the modern age. No more tacky decorations lowering property values. As she clicked away down the sidewalk, I noticed she was stopping at Sarah's house next door. Sarah was an ER nurse who just finished a grueling night shift. The last thing she needed was Karen's morning harassment about her garbage bins being out too long. I watched as Karen started taking photos of Sarah's property, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about my lawn or my gnomes anymore. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I'd learned to spot patterns of harassment and abuse of power. Karen wasn't just being strict, she was targeting specific residents. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group. The complaints about Karen were piling up. Mark, the firefighter on the corner, had been fined for his kid's basketball hoop. The elderly couple across the street got a violation for their unapproved rose bushes. Even the local teacher had been cited for parking his car in his own driveway because it was too old and unsightly. I was about to pull out of my driveway when I spotted Karen taking more pictures of my gnomes. She didn't know it yet, but she just made a serious mistake. See, being chief of police had taught me one very important thing. Sometimes the biggest crimes aren't the ones that make headlines, but the small injustices that chip away at a community spirit. As I drove to work, my mind was already forming a plan. Karen thought she had all the power, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with, or what I would discover when I started digging into her perfect facade 2 days after finding that ridiculous lime green ticket. I couldn't believe my eyes there. They were 2 black SUVs with HOA security plastered on the sides, completely blocking my driveway. I just finished a brutal double shift dealing with a bank robbery downtown, and all I wanted was to park my car and get some sleep. But no, Karen Mitchell had other plans. I watched through my windshield as she strutted across my front lawn in her designer suit, tablet in hand, taking pictures of everything from my garden hose to my welcome mat. Each flash of a camera made my blood pressure rise a little more, but I kept my cool. 20 years on the force taught me that losing your temper never solves anything. Excuse me, I called out, stepping out of my car. You're blocking my driveway, and I need to get to my garage. Karen spun around, her perfectly styled blonde hair swishing like a shampoo commercial. Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson, our neighborhood's most persistent rule breaker. She tapped her tablet screen with her long red nails. Let's see, unpaid fine for lawn height violations, unapproved garden gnome placement. And now she paused for dramatic effect. Non-regulation mailbox color. I couldn't help but laugh. Non-regulation mailbox color. The mailbox is white. It's been white for the 15 years I've lived here, according to our new guidelines. Approved last week. All mailboxes must be painted pristine pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection. Your mailbox is clearly classic white, a completely different shade. She smiled like she just solved a murder case. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Karen, I understand you're new to the neighborhood, but these security vehicles are parked illegally. They're blocking access to my property, which is a violation of City Ordinance 20. 345. Her smile flickered for just a second. I have full authority as HOA board member to enforce our community standards. These security officers, she gestured to two guys in ill-fitting uniforms leaning against their SUVs, are here to ensure compliance. That's when I noticed something odd about their badges. They looked almost like real police badges, but not quite. As chief of police, I knew every licensed security company in our jurisdiction, and Mitchell Security Solutions wasn't one of them. I took a deep breath and decided to try reason one more time. Look, I get that you're trying to maintain property values, but blocking someone's driveway over a $79 fine isn't just unreasonable, it's illegal. I'd hate to have to escalate this. Karen's face turned the same color as her nails. Is that a threat, Mr. Johnson? Because I have photos documenting every violation on your property, and the HOA board will be very interested in your aggressive attitude. She turned to the security guards. Make a note of his threatening behavior. As they fumbled with their notepads, I noticed their shoulder patches were peeling off. They looked like they'd been printed at a local copy shop. Something wasn't adding up here, and my cop instincts were kicking in hard. I pulled up the city's business license database on my phone, keeping one eye on Karen as she continued photographing my property. 3 taps later, I had what I needed. Or rather, what wasn't there? No licensed security company registered under her name or her brother's, who I'd seen at the last HOA meeting wearing a similar uniform. Just then Mrs. Garcia from next door came rushing out of her house in her nurse's scrubs. Chief Johnson, I'm so glad you're here. They've been blocking my driveway too, and I'm late for my hospital shift. I watched Karen's face closely as she heard the word chief. Her eyes widened just slightly, and her tablet nearly slipped from her fingers, but instead of backing down, she lifted her chin higher. Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Johnson. HOA rules apply to everyone equally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to document a few more violations before I process the additional fines for your uncooperative behavior. As she walked away, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. I knew this was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. I had a feeling Karen's perfect HOA world was about to get a lot more complicated, especially once I started looking into exactly how these new security measures got approved. I never expected a simple lawn dispute to uncover something so disturbing in our peaceful neighborhood. It started when Sarah, an ER nurse who lives 3 houses down, knocked on my door at 6 a.m. stilling her scrubs and fighting back tears. She just finished a brutal overnight shift dealing with a bus crash, only to find her entire front yard plastered with bright orange violation notices. Chief, she said, her hands shaking as she held up the stack of papers. They're threatening to put a lien on my house because my garbage bin stayed out for an extra day while I was working a double shift during the crisis. The sight of this dedicated nurse who just spent 16 hours saving lives being harassed over garbage bins made my blood boil. But Sarah wasn't alone. As I started asking around, more stories emerged. Mark, the firefighter on Maple Street, showed me citation after citation for his kid's basketball hoop, the same hoop that had been there for 5 years without issue before Karen joined the board. The Martinez family got fined because their Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past Karen's arbitrary deadline. They'd been at their grandmother's funeral. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, spreading out all the complaints like pieces of a puzzle. The pattern was clear as day. Karen wasn't just being picky, she was specifically targeting homes where people worked long or irregular hours. First responders, nurses, doctors, firefighters, people who couldn't always be home to jump at her every demand. My police instincts kicked in. I started mapping out every citation issued in the past 3 months since Karen took power. The cluster of violations formed a clear pattern around homes of emergency workers and those who deposed her during the HOA election. This wasn't random, this was calculated harassment. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Tom, my deputy, who lived in the next subdivision. Chief, you're not going to believe this. Remember that flooding issue last spring? Just found out Karen's brother's company got the contract for drainage repair, cost 3 times what the other bids quoted. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how Karen had laughed in my face earlier that day when I tried to reason with her about my own fine rules. Our rules, she'd said, that smug smile never leaving her face. But now I understood these weren't rules, this was a power trip, and possibly something even more sinister. Just then my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Chen from across the street, an elderly widow who'd lived here longer than anyone. Chief, she whispered, looking over her shoulder nervously, I saw them installing cameras on the streetlights today. They didn't ask permission. Karen says it's for security, but they're all pointed at specific houses, including yours. My jaw tightened. Unauthorized surveillance in my jurisdiction. Now Karen wasn't just being a nuisance, she was potentially breaking the law, but I needed more proof before I could act. If I moved too quickly, she'd play the victim, claim I was abusing my position as chief. As I walked Mrs. Chen home, I spotted Karen in her driveway talking to 2 men I'd never seen before. They wore uniforms from her brother's security company, but something about them seemed off. My gut told me there was more to this story. And in 20 years of police work, my gut had rarely been wrong. I closed my eyes, remembering what my mentor used to say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Karen had built herself a little kingdom of fear and intimidation, But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd gotten too confident, too sloppy. She didn't realize that while she was watching us, we were watching her too. The real question now wasn't just about stopping Karen, it was about exposing the whole corrupt system she'd built. As I looked at the growing pile of evidence on my desk, I knew tomorrow would be a very interesting day at the HOA emergency meeting, especially when they discovered who had just been quietly appointed to the county's Housing Authority Oversight Committee. I couldn't sleep that night thinking about how Karen had been treating everyone in our neighborhood. Something didn't feel right about the whole situation. While drinking my morning coffee, I remembered an important lesson from my early days as a rookie cop. Follow the money. The security company blocking my driveway had seemed oddly eager to do Karen's bidding, and their uniforms looked suspiciously new at work. I asked Jenny from our records department to run a basic business check on the security company, Elite Neighborhood Watch Services. Within minutes, my suspicions grew stronger. The company had only been registered 3 months ago, right after Karen joined the HOA board. The owner's last name matched Karen's maiden name, and the business address led to a P.O. box instead of a real office. I drove by Sarah's house on my lunch break. She was just getting home from her hospital shift, looking exhausted. "Chief," she called out when she saw me, "they left another notice this morning. I can't keep paying these fines on a nurse's salary." She showed me a stack of violation notices, all signed by Karen, all citing obscure HOA rules that seemed to target working people specifically. Back at the station, I dug deeper into public records. Karen's brother Tom Mitchell had a history of failed security companies in 3 different states. Each time complaints had been filed about aggressive tactics and unauthorized vehicle blocking, but they'd always disappeared before any real investigation could start. My next stop was the county clerk's office. The friendly clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped me pull HOA registration documents from the last 6 months. Flipping through the pages, I found exactly what I needed. Karen had never disclosed her family connection to the security company when bidding for the HOA contract. That was a clear violation of the HOA's own conflict of interest rules. But the real goldmine came when I checked Karen's home business registration. She'd been running a daycare center from her garage, caring for 6 kids at a time. The HOA rules strictly prohibited commercial activities, the very same rules she'd been using to find other neighbors for having home offices. Even better, she didn't have proper childcare licensing from the state. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark, the firefighter. "Chief, you need to see this." He sent me photos of Karen's security company cars parked in fire lanes around the neighborhood. As a firefighter, he knew exactly how dangerous this was. We couldn't get a truck through there if we needed to. His message read, "I spent the rest of the afternoon building my case." Property maps showed Karen had extended her back fence 2 feet beyond her property line. Security camera footage from my cruiser proved her company had blocked emergency vehicle access multiple times. The HOA's financial records revealed she'd been pushing the board to increase fines while directing all security contracts to her brother's company. The evidence was mounting, but I had to be smart about how I used it. Karen had friends on the city council, and I needed to make sure everything was completely legal and properly documented. I made copies of every document and stored them in both digital and physical formats. Years of police work had taught to always have backups. Just as I was finishing up, Officer Rodriguez rushed into my office. "Chief, you won't believe this. That security company tried to boot Dr. Thompson's car at the emergency room entrance. He was rushing in for a critical surgery." My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. This was the final piece I needed. I sat back in my chair looking at the wall of evidence I'd gathered. Karen had no idea what was coming. In her rush to build her little kingdom of power, she'd left a trail of violations that would shock even her supporters on the HO board. The real question now was timing, when and how to present this information for maximum impact. A text message lit up my phone screen. It was from one of my sergeants. "Karen just submitted a proposal for expanded security measures. Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow night." I smiled, knowing the perfect moment had just presented itself. Sometimes the best investigations are the ones where you let your target walk right into the trap they've set for others. Walking into that HOA meeting, my heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. Karen stood at the front of the room in her designer suit, waving around a stack of papers about her new community safety program. I watched as she talked about hiring more security guards and adding cameras on every street. The whole room seemed tired of her rules, but everyone was too scared to speak up. I waited until she finished her speech about protecting our property values. Then, just as she asked for votes, I raised my hand. The familiar weight of my badge in my pocket gave me strength. "Before we vote," I said, standing up slowly, "I think there's something everyone needs to know." Karen's eyes narrowed, not recognizing me out of uniform. "I'm Chief Anderson, and I've been investigating some concerning issues." I pulled out my own stack of papers, property records, business licenses, and photos. The projector clicked on, showing Karen's illegal home business setup clear as day. "These pictures show an unlicensed daycare operation running out of your house, Mrs. Mitchell. That's against both HOA rules and state regulations." Karen's face turned red. "How dare you? This is private property. Public records aren't private," I replied calmly, changing To the next slide, neither is this business registration. Showing your brother owns Safe Shield Security, the same company now patrolling our streets without proper licensing. The room erupted in whispers. I continued, while you've been finding Sarah Thompson, our local ER nurse, for leaving her trash bins out an extra hour after her night shifts. You've been running an illegal business while you cited Mark Rodriguez's kids for their basketball hoop. Your security company has been operating without permits. Mrs. Chen from down the street stood up. She fined me $200 for my Chinese New Year decorations. Others joined in sharing their stories of Karen's targeted harassment. Karen tried to grab her papers and storm out, but the HOA president, Mr. Jenkins, blocked the door. Not so fast, Karen, we need to discuss this. I shared evidence of every unfair fine, every made-up rule, and every double standard. The room got louder with each revelation. Parents who'd been F for their kids' chalk drawings spoke up. Senior citizens shared how they'd been harassed about their garden gnomes and bird baths. And here's the biggest problem, I said, showing the final slide. The security company has been writing tickets and blocking driveways without any legal authority to do so. That's impersonating law enforcement, a serious offense. Karen's perfect mask finally cracked. You can't prove anything. I was making this neighborhood better. These people need rules. Rules apply to everyone, I replied, including you. The room burst into applause. Mr. Jenkins called for an emergency vote, and hands shot up across the room. Karen wasn't just removed from the board, she was banned from ever serving again. As she finally pushed past everyone to leave, she turned back with tears of rage in her eyes. This isn't over, she shouted. But looking at our united neighbors, I knew it was sometimes justice wears a badge, and sometimes it just needs someone to stand up and tell the truth. I walked into that HOA meeting room with every piece of evidence carefully organized in my folder. The room was packed. I'd never seen so many neighbors show up before. Karen sat at the front table tapping away at her tablet like she owned the place. She didn't even look up when I entered. Before we vote on the new security measures, I announced, standing up from my seat in the back, I'd like to address the board. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as I walked to the front. For those who don't know me, I'm James Mitchell. I've lived here for 15 years, and I'm also the chief of police for our city. The whispers started immediately. Karen's tea slipped from her hands, clattering on the table. I could see her brother, the security company owner, shifting uncomfortably in his chair by the door. Over the past 3 months, there have been 47 fines issued in our community. 35 of them were given to first responders and essential workers. I pulled out my first piece of evidence, a color-coded map showing every cited house. Notice any pattern. The board members leaned forward, studying the clusters of red dots. Mrs. Thompson, our retired school principal and longest-serving board member, adjusted her glasses with trembling hands. But that's not all. I continued, pulling out more documents. The security company hired to enforce these citations, Mitchell Security LLC, isn't just unlicensed, it's operating illegally under our state's private security contractor laws. Karen's brother stood up, heading for the door, but 2 uniformed officers I had stationed outside were already waiting. Karen jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. You can't use police resources for personal vendettas. You're right, I smiled. That's why everything I'm presenting tonight came from public records and legal channels, including the documents showing your home-based business that violates Section 7 of our HOA agreement. The room erupted. Neighbors started sharing their own stories. The single mom fined for Christmas lights in January while she worked double shifts, the elderly couple targeted for their medical equipment delivery, and the kindergarten teacher cited for children's chalk drawings on her own driveway. Mrs. Thompson stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. I moved to immediately remove Karen Mitchell from the board and launch a full audit of all fines issued under her authority. Second, 5 voices called out at once. Karen's face had turned from red to white. You can't do this. I was protecting property values. I was maintaining standards. No, I said quietly, you were bullying people who didn't have time to fight back. But that ends today. The vote was unanimous as Karen stormed out, her designer handbag swinging wildly. Neighbors started hugging each other. Sarah, the ER nurse who'd received 8 citations, was crying as she hugged Mark, the firefighter who'd nearly lost his kid's basketball hoop. I stayed late helping Mrs. Thompson start the paperwork to refund every unfair fine. We found over $115,000 worth of citations, each one more ridiculous than the last. As we worked, neighbors kept dropping by with coffee, snacks, and stories of relief. The next morning, I drove to work past Karen's house. A moving truck was already in her driveway. Her brother's security vehicles were gone too, replaced by legitimate patrol cars, making sure the moving company had proper permits. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started coming out again. Kids played in their yards without fear of citations, and Mrs. Thompson organized a community barbecue to celebrate the return of common sense. But the best moment came a week later. I was watering my lawn, exactly 3.5 in tall, when Sarah's daughter ran up with a handmade card. Inside was a crayon drawing of me in my police uniform standing in front of a rainbow-colored house. The message read, "Thank you for making our neighborhood happy again." That card sits on my desk at the station now, reminding me that sometimes the most Important police work happens right at home. Our community learned a valuable lesson. It's not about having power, it's about how you use it. And as for Karen, last I heard she tried to join another HOA board 2 towns over, but somehow they'd already heard all about her experience with us. The information in this video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. HOA rules and laws vary by state and community.